Why was it so easy for the Romans to accept Jesus, to go for Christianity? Well, the reason why it was so easy for them to accept it is because the Jesus story and the Zeus story has many similarities. Many of the motifs are exactly the same. And many of them are similar enough that it was a ready-made story for the Romans. It was written in such a way so that it would be a ready-made story for the Romans. I'm going to tell you the story of Zeus. And I know that some people are going to come on here and they're going to say that, well, the name Jesus was transliterated into Ius, which is just means hail Zeus. No, it doesn't. Ius is a transliteration, meaning that they could not pronounce the word Yeshua or Yahshua in Greek. So Ius was the closest thing that they had to that name. But notwithstanding that, let me tell you about Zeus, and you will see the similarities in the Jesus story. So according to the Greek story that the Romans had adopted into their own story, Zeus is the king of the gods. He is the new king of the gods from the old God, just as Jesus is the new king of the God from the old God of the Old Testament. Zeus was also fit the motif of the young son who would overthrow the father and take over his kingdom. And Jesus is the son who takes over the kingdom of the Old Testament God. So Kronos, representing Yahweh, Kronos was the king of the Titans, king of the universe. Kronos also had incest with his sister, Re, in order to produce children. But out of fear that these children would overthrow him, Kronos decided to devour the children. Now, because they were immortal gods, they simply just lived inside of the belly of Kronos. When his wife Re was going to have another baby, that being Zeus, she snuck away to a cave on the island of Crete to have this baby. In the same way that Jesus, when he was born, there was no room at the inn, so he had to be born down in the manger. The inn being the family house, the manger being the lower parts of the house where the small animals are kept, that is considered to be unclean. Now, after the baby Zeus was born, his mother, Re, she took a rock and swaddled the rock into baby clothing, and Kronos devoured the rock. Zeus grew up in the cave until he was an adult away from his father's eyes. Jesus being threatened to be killed by Herod, was snuck away, according to the story of Matthew, to go to Egypt and not to return until he was an adult, so that he was actually strong enough to fight against his father and start his new kingdom. So both were hidden away until they were adults. Upon returning, one of the first things that Zeus did was to poison Kronos' mead, his beer, so that Kronos would throw up the rock and then proceed to throw up the 5 other children that he had previously swallowed. Upon Jesus' return, his first miracle is to turn water into wine during a wedding where people were already drunk. And Jesus' first disciple was Peter, whose name means rock, or little rock actually, like pebble, small rock. Then Zeus decided that he needed to have more warriors. So he went down into Tartarus, went down to Hades and entered Tartarus to side up with the Cyclops and the 100 Hands people in order to be able to fight against Kronos and the other Titans. Jesus, at the point of his death, is supposedly, according to certain doctrines, went down into Hades to preach and resurrect the dead who had come before him, the righteous who had went before him, who were treated unfairly and sent into Tartarus, into hell. Now, in this earthly walk, Jesus gained 12 apostles to help preach and teach his message, in the same way that Zeus had his brothers and sisters. Now, in the great battle against Titan, Zeus used his intellect, had a different idea of how the kingdom of the world should be ran. That's why he brought the Cyclops and the 100 Hands people back. Jesus taught differently, adversely to his father. Turn the other cheek instead of an eye for an eye. Let he who without sin cast the first stone instead of stoning a person who had committed adultery. You see, Jesus' teachings are different than the Old Testament God's teachings. They weren't exactly the same. Although some things remained, he made significant differences that showed that he was talking about a different type of kingdom that was going to be ran under his rule. Zeus was doing the exact same thing. In a last-ditch battle, in the battle to end all battles, Zeus fought against Typhon. Typhon was a multi-headed serpent being. Well, he had a human body with multiple headed serpents coming out of him. Jesus in the Battle of Armageddon is supposed to fight against the beast with 7 serpent heads. At the end of the battle, Zeus cast his lightning bolt so strong and to subdue Typhon that the volcano at Soretini, I'm pronouncing the name of the island wrong, Santorini. The island of Santorini erupted in a huge explosion, 50,000 times that of Hiroshima. It is said that that volcanic eruption actually was felt all over the world, is what geologists think, or volcanologists think. But he defeated him and cast him back into the lake of fire that was the caldera of that volcano. Jesus, in the Battle of Armageddon, supposedly defeats the 7-headed serpent beast and casts him and his Antichrist prophet into, and all the demons, into this lake of fire. Sounds familiar, right? Many of these stories have familiarity to them. This is why it was easy for the Romans to accept Christianity, because it was already a motif that they had already been believing. And you can find this motif in many other religions, whether we're talking about Anu and Enki and Enlil, whether we are talking about Ra and Isis and Osiris and Set. Ra and Set are supposedly fighting Apophis every night, a big serpent, so that the sun will rise again. It is always the story of the son trying to overthrow the father who was possibly corrupt, the father who was not leading the kingdom in the way that it desired to be led. And these stories have all similarities of a son having to be hidden away, and then the son's return, and the son gathering his forces, and the son fighting this battle against the father, having a difference of thought process and opinion than the father. We see this in both stories. It made it palatable to the people of that day to accept this story because it was something similar enough to what they already believed. And when you look at many of these newfound Christian cults or other cultish religions that are coming up, they always bring in the similarities and then give their slight distinctive differences in order to keep people somewhat attached and not take away everything from them, so that they can still believe in Jesus, but I'm spiritual now. I still believe in Jesus, but I'm trying to get the Christ mind. And that's actually a discussion there. I can understand that, but it's not the Christ mind. That teaching was well before Jesus. But it is that idea of, I want to believe in Jesus, but we're going to take Jesus and we're going to make him Mormon, and we're going to make him come to the natives and talk to the natives. Jesus was just a great teacher, a great prophet, but Allah is the true God. Or Jesus was a great prophet, but Jehovah is still the God. They are not one and the same, but different. You hold on to a small piece of what you are accustomed to, what you've been taught your whole life, and they just twerk it just enough to create something new and different. The Jesus story is a twerk of the many different cultures, but the Greek story is definitely one of those stories, since it was written around 700 BCE, definitely taught to the people in Judea in the around the 3rd and 2nd century BCE, and it has been adopted by the Romans, and it was adopted then by the Christians in order to fit a narrative that was palatable to the people. So tell me what you guys think, and always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.